Good morning, BookTube. It's been a minute, but I'm so excited to be here because I have Ryan from Book Time with Ryan with me to talk about the Black Hearts Book Club book pick. And I guess we'll just start, Ryan, by talking a little bit about your channel. And then you can display the book and tell us what the book is. And I guess if you want to go ahead and tell what your rating would be for the book, that would be great too.
Oh, what did I give it? I think I gave it four
I think,
stars.
yeah,
Is that what I
I
gave?
think you're right.
Yeah,
Yes, I did watch your
I did like
review,
the
and I'm
book.
pretty sure it was 4 stars.
Yeah, I think it was four. Yeah, I finished it. When did you finish it? I finished it like a week ago or something.
I finished it a couple days after you did.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure.
and nothing had changed in their plight between when I finished it and when you finished it, so that was okay. Let's see, when did I give it? I think it was 4 stars. I did a review. I liked it. So about my channel, what you're gonna be able to tell, I think, from this is that there's no preparation on my channel at all. So I've not come prepared in any way for this. Um, I did talk about the Donner Party to a couple people in the last 48 hours, I think, but that is pretty much all the preparation I had for this. Um, so I don't know how old you are. I'm 40, and I think I just read whatever. Yeah, 4 stars. I basically read whatever I want whenever. It's like a mood. I do
Yeah.
mood reading, but I kind of like switch it up sometimes between fiction and nonfiction. So I read this. Not to spoil anything, there's some dismemberment, and that led me to read about the Bobbitt case, Lorena Bobbitt and John Bobbitt. So sometimes there's like little tie-ins with other books that kind of inspire me to read something else. But this one was you told me about it, and then I was like, yes, I want to read the harrowing saga of the Donner Party. And fun fact, I was spelling Donner wrong for pretty much the first time I uploaded it because I think I screwed that up, and then on my thumbnails, and I had to go back and edit in the e. It was like donor. It was like donor party.
Yeah, well, kind of the same thing, right? They were
Some
all
of them were
well, some of
donors.
them were donors.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think you were actually fixing that when I was watching your video because I'd watched your video and I'd paused it. I was trying to type a comment and it was like comments have been disabled and then it was like weird stuff happening. So I was like, you know what? I bet he is editing that thumbnail.
yeah. I
And
edited it
sure
in.
enough, it was like real time that
Yeah,
that
oh
that
yeah.
was happening. So um
I think it kept prompting me to spell it the right way, and I was like, "No, that's not it, you stupid phone." So then I changed it to the wrong thing. I didn't change it in. Hi, you two almost finished, but not. Oh, hey.
Mark, yeah. Hey
Um,
Mark, good to see you.
yay. So I changed it in YouTube, but I didn't take down the actual video and then because just I think I already deleted the video that went with it. I do everything on my phone, so it's basically like I had the file. I went into iMovie, edited it, and then switched it over to my computer and uploaded it. And then I deleted everything, so I didn't have a bunch of like I would have like 20-minute videos of me just blah, 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 blah. And I edit out a lot of ums and uhs, so they're much worse before I edit them, which is hard to
Same,
believe.
same. I will say this about Ryan's channel. I don't know why you don't have way more subscribers because you are so funny. And I don't I don't watch a ton of booktube anymore, but I know every time I watch a video of yours, you're gonna make me laugh. Like you're just pretty witty, you're pretty funny. And actually that's kind of the reason I asked you to read this book. Because sorry, the sun.
So we can
Uh,
make light of people's
well,
harrowing
I
experiences.
figured you would lighten the mood just a bit because yeah, it's definitely not, you know, holiday reading. It's not something you want to, sit by the Christmas tree and, you know, get
It is.
cozy with and read.
I
I don't
mean,
know.
it
For
is kind of
most,
like family
for
dinner.
me, I guess.
Yeah, but it's like you join your family around the table and you eat. It just what are you eating? Your family members in this case.
Yeah.
So Or sometimes they were trying not to eat their family members.
Yes,
This
that
is not the
was,
first cannibalism book that I've read either, so I'm getting really into it.
yeah.
Oh yeah, like I'm totally into cannibalism. Like I'm gonna join some dark web groups, and no, I'm not gonna do that.
Please
But
don't. Please don't.
yeah,
We'll have
no,
a booktube intervention over here.
it's right. It's weird how they handle it, because you don't. Like it is taboo. I mentioned that. So like, how are you gonna write a whole book where it's not just grossing people out? But I think he did a good job at it.
Yeah, I thought he did it very tastefully. I mean, he didn't shy away from some of those details, which I think,
Oh yeah,
the details are fascinating, really. I mean,
they're
why
creepy.
do why
Yeah,
do we have, book clubs devoted to true crime and sort of darker aspects of humanity? I think it's because we're fascinated with what humans are capable of.
yeah,
And, I really sympathized with the people in this tragedy because it could have easily been anyone. I mean, when you really think about what these people were doing, um, going out west, I guess, what was your thoughts about people on the Oregon Trail and, kind of those going out to the frontier? What was your thought about that prior to reading this book? And did you have any sort of changes in perspective or something that surprised you about that group of people?
yeah. I mean, when I went on the Oregon Trail in the '90s, it was a lot of hunting. We just kept hunting, fording rivers, hunting. We were looking for buffalo. Rabbits were too fast, but it was buffalo and sometimes deer. Um, and we would do that every week in
In the computer lab?
in our computer lab. Yeah,
Me
it was,
too.
it was the old version where it was just like a person.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
and
I'm
then they switched
37,
to
so I
the
think we're
gun sight.
right. We're
This
right
is not for
there.
the youngsters here. They're like,
Yeah. What are you
Roblox?
talking about? Yeah.
I don't know what Oregon Trail is. And like your parent, like there was a lot of death in Oregon Trail, the game, and
Yes.
I think we see stuff. I feel like we've sped up time, over history. So we're used to needing to we're used to having to really fill our time with a lot more. And it's like getting on here, like I'm not sending you pictures that I drew to go back and forth with you about this book with like some kind of Pony Express. Like we're on here, we're gonna do this, then we're gonna hang up, you're gonna drive away, and you're not used to kind of the pace that people had in the 1800s. So it's kind of like I'm used to, I would drive to Tennessee and it would take me from Northern Virginia or DC. It would take me, I don't know, 12 hours, maybe a little more. And this is months, weeks and months of them crossing. And we're very used to, I'm going to close this other computer because it keeps dinging. We're very used to like having 911 ready to go and just knowing that there's going to be somebody there to help. And these people didn't have that at all. They were traveling to an area that wasn't a country. It was some of it was territory. I guess some of it was part of Mexico. There's nobody to fall back on. There's no kind of mulligans where you're like, I'm gonna do over. This is really hard. I'm just gonna turn around and go back because you just spent months traveling as far as you did through hostile territory. Because this was a period of time where you had Plains Indians that were attacking groups, and then beyond that, I think one of the things I thought was interesting in the book was he was talking about they got to an area that was a dried out river, and they had to build a path across that ditch that was like 20 feet deep. And I was like, 20 feet? That's pretty bad. And you're gonna build enough to take your horses and your oxen and your wagons across there. That's crazy how long that would take. Um, and they just did it because they had to. I would never like. I think my takeaway was I would never survive that time period at all. Definitely not from just jumping in from now. And it would be very unpleasant. But it was just like they were traveling so far. They were so far away from anything that could help them, and we're used to seeing maps, charts, and kind of well now we're used to GPS. But before that, we had printed notes that you'd have to follow. This is even worse than that. This is just kind of like we've heard. I've never been here, because I've never traveled outside of my town, but I think there's a pass in this mountain, and I've never been on mountains this big. And this is the description: it's a pass. Like I drive down the street, I could mark 50 things I think could be a pass. And if I had no way of knowing where I was going, I may take the wrong pass, and then I may end up in the wrong place. But they had to risk that all the time. They were losing kids. Like, I mean, if you've ever done 23andMe, not 23andMe, if you've ever done Ancestry, and you go far enough back in your family, and they have like
Yes.
7-10 kids, you're like, ooh, that's a lot. But a lot of them died. So there was always that real threat that you were going to lose people, and that if you did sprain your ankle, if you broke something, there was a chance that you were going to be left behind. So it's like it's much more rugged and less fun. People always want to talk about, well, would it be cool to be a pirate? And you're like, I don't. You're hitting on like the really fun stuff of being a pirate, plundering and killing people and stuff. But you're not thinking about like all the pirate ships that sink and all the people that die and they starve and they go to eat their shipmates because they are 1,000 miles off a coast. So I think this is one of those examples where you're like, oh, they're just hopping in a wagon with a bunch of people and heading out. But it's like, a lot of them died. A lot of them died. And we found out a lot of it was like, was it typhoid or whatever? I mean, or.
Yeah. I think for me, that was kind of, I think there is a misconception because, they are going out west and people have this imagery of out west being, wild and, you've got the Native American tribes and it's very volatile. And while there was some of that, I think that was pretty minimal. Like as far as what I understand of people on the Oregon Trail, the fear that they had over Native American attacks, it was a very real fear, but the likelihood that they were going to die from an Indian attack is very, very low. On the flip side, the likelihood they're going to die of disease or falling and breaking something and getting an infection, that was really, really high.
And they didn't really know what disease was, so they didn't know what was like how it was happening.
Yeah. And I think to your point about taking these shortcuts and taking these passes, a lot of us in the group, we were talking about, why this happened, and some folks couldn't really wrap their head around why they wouldn't turn around. And I actually could identify with the party not turning around, because I think, when you put yourself in that situation and you've gone through hell really to get to where you are, I guess the easier decision really is to keep moving forward, because if you turn around, you got to go back through the same hell you just came through, you know? And then if you go forward, it's like, okay, well, maybe there's still that hope. There's still that possibility. And, of course, that's what the West is all about, right? It's about that, that hope, that, drive to, seek out a better life for your family. And, very, very difficult to even contemplate having to make those decisions and knowing that whatever you decide, tragedy will likely ensue. I mean, whether you turn back or you go forward, people are going to die. And I think that, coming to that realization on the trail probably was very sobering. And I think we do see that. I mean, did you kind of notice that the tone kind of changed? In the beginning, it's the young people on the trail, they're excited, they're making eyes at each other, and, things are still pretty hopeful. And
They're doing it along the trail. You don't see that in the old video game either.
Yeah, that was not, actually in that old video game, I don't know about you, Ryan, but I always took the Bible with me. I could never leave the Bible behind. You had to make that was an option. Yeah.
We just loaded up on ammo. Like it was not accurate at all. We'd name everyone our friends. They would all die of syphilis, not syphilis. That would be rough in your family, like typhoid, and then we'd ford the river and it would flip over, and one of our other relatives, like all your friends would die. It was like John died, and you're like, oh. But yeah, I
Yeah,
don't.
you had to decide what to take, like the blankets, the ammo. It was a whole list of things, and I'm pretty sure the Bible was one because I was like,
I
okay,
just
I've got to
I
take the
did that
Bible
job.
with me because you know I
Yeah,
don't know if I'm going to make it if I don't
yeah.
take it. But you know that was something else too, is these people deciding what to bring and what not to bring, and we quickly see that you know, stuff just becomes so inconsequential. I mean, you know, these things that they thought were so important. Um, and some of them actually were important. So they get to the point to where they are having to leave behind, you know, necessary items. Um, what did you think about that point when they're in the trail and I forget exactly where they are, but they're crossing some mountainside with these big crevices. They cannot fit the wagons through.
Oh
Literally,
yeah,
oxen are like falling off of the sheer cliff face. I mean, to
yeah.
their death. And so basically, they're at the point where it's like, okay, we've got to ditch these wagons.
Hmm. That
Um,
was right before. That was right before they got to like Reno and stuff. I mean, it was like that earlier mountain chain, and then they got to Sierra Nevadas.
yeah,
Yeah, I think it's like you kind of pack everything you think you're gonna need, and then that thousands of miles, things needs change. One, they started late, then they were later than they were supposed to.
yeah,
Um, really, I mean, they were a couple days off, and they would have been fine, maybe, but they hit it at the worst time. I mean, I think going into it, I thought that they must have made a lot of mistakes, and it was really they were just kind of screwed. And a lot of it was no fault of their own. It was they got bad information from somebody they thought was legitimate, and he wasn't. But they just went with it because he had a book, and it seemed right. This is when fraud was rampant, and there were snake oil salesmen all over the place, and people could kind of be taken in by that. But yeah, I think there are things that they got rid of. Some of the clothing, some of the early supplies, just to make it easier on the oxen because the oxen were getting overworked. And part of that was for people who haven't read it. There was a lot of rain, and if you have a dry track, it's not so bad. But they were getting bogged down, and the oxen were being overworked. And where they were in the United States, there wasn't a lot for them to eat, so they really had to start lightening the load for the oxen. Some people had overpacked too, or oxen, mules and oxen. So then they get in the mountains and it gets cold, and suddenly you start thinking back. Do you really need to bring all your silver? Not really. It's like being in the desert and all you want is water, and you're willing to. I mean, it's worth everything to you. This is kind of one of those times where I think there are things that, and they, I don't fault them. Like, how can you plan for that?
right,
Either you're going to be stuck there, you're going to be stuck somewhere else. But kind of your point, they're turning around. There's no easy turning around point either. They had already gone through really bad areas that they were going to have to go through again, and they'd already lost a lot of people and a lot of animals doing that. So they were going to lose more doing it again. But you'll go to your friend's house or like a new house, and they'll say like it's the third right after the big house, the big yellow house, and you're driving there. You're like, is that the yellow house or time? Is that a big one? Do you define that as big? And you're kind of second guessing, am I going the right way? And
yeah,
it's easy if you go one, you're like, that was a pull off. We should have done that. That was an actual street. Turn around and we'll go back that way. One of the things that happened in this was that there was a note left behind, which is just crazy because think about like where you live, and if there's just one note in a bush somewhere, what are the chances you're going to get that? How many
yeah,
notes were not found that may have said other things that we just never know about? They blew away, they got rained on, and then kind of deteriorated. But they found one note that was like, "Hey, come this way, and I'll meet you at this other place." And they did that because that seems legit. If you're out in the middle of nowhere, you have what you think is a reputable guide, and he tells you he's somewhere, then you think, okay, well, I'll get there, and then it'll be okay. Why not? You can't second guess everything. You have to take some risk. but the
Right.
risk they took, uh, I think were reasonable risks. They just ended up in really bad areas, and then we get used to distances too. I mean, you run,
Yeah.
right? You like run distance,
Hmm.
but the distances that you run, you could have people that do like a marathon, and they would be fine in this situation if it was flat and everything was good. Not,
Elevation makes a
yeah,
huge difference.
not crazy distances. It's the distance. It's less than I go into work. That they had to go to find some help, but the depth of the snow I think was crazy too, because we're talking
Yeah.
20-40 feet of snow, um, and that's just like another level of difficulty that I can't even comprehend. But it is one of those things where you're looking at it. If you're looking at a map, I don't know if you looked at. I looked at like Google, not Google Earth, Google Maps, and I was trying to follow where they were. I'm like, this isn't that remote. It's remote, but it's not. They were much closer to settlements at the very end of it than they were midway through. They just couldn't get over and then by then they were also really starting to lose. Like they weren't physically, they were pretty run down, so they couldn't make those long walks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
The um, most interesting part to me of the book was the discussion about the psychology of the travelers and basically how important their mindset was to survival. And I think that is, just so fascinating. The author even talked about the discrepancies between males and females, which I'd had started to notice kind of along the way as we were reading, that there
yeah,
were, I think, 14 men who died on this journey before the first female did. Um, and it seemed like at certain points, the women were a little more, I guess, positive and displayed a little bit more fortitude as far as like, thinking that we're going to survive this or we can survive this. Um, and obviously, I think there's a ton of factors in that. And probably part of it is that, the men were bearing the brunt of the responsibility for, taking the risk and moving the wagons and, kind of putting themselves in harm's way and that sort of thing. So I think that definitely needs to be acknowledged, even though I'm very, yay, women, we're awesome. But, the men are really the ones that are having to bear the brunt of that. That doesn't take away from what these women did because they were also having to do a lot of very heavy lifting and manual labor along this trail. It wasn't easy for anyone, and
yeah. And somebody
many
had to eat the men, so you
somebody
don't
had to
want
eat
that.
them in.
You don't want that meat to go to waste.
And they were having children along the way, which is
Yeah,
just crazy to me. That
not a
they
good
would
place.
even survive that, which of course that a lot of women died
Yeah,
in childbirth or shortly thereafter. But I think that also played a part in why they survived
yeah,
because they have children to take care of. And
yep,
so I think that whole there's an instinct there, I think, that makes a difference. And even for the men, if the men were unattached, so they
yeah,
didn't have a wife or they didn't have any family members on the trail, it was a lot more likely that they were going to die. And I
yeah,
think I think we see that with the first gentleman. I can't remember his name, but he was the first one to suggest that they resort to cannibalism, and he ends up dying shortly thereafter of hypothermia. Um, and I think probably just that mindset of him thinking, oh, we're going to starve,
yeah,
and kind of even just broaching that topic, I think it put him in that place of, I'm done. Um,
yep.
because, I was shocked. I always thought they had to resort to
Well, it
cannibalism.
wasn't just
And
that he mentioned it. Wasn't this the guy who drew the short straw?
yeah, so
And
then
he knew that if they were gonna have to kill somebody, it was gonna
it
be
was going to
him.
be
He was gonna
him.
go first. Yeah,
Which I think he was okay with. I don't want to say okay with it. I mean, I think he was probably sincere in his offering there, but when they didn't do it immediately, so they didn't have the heart to
He
kill him.
lost it, right?
He
He went
lost
crazy.
it. He
Yeah.
went crazy because now he's super paranoid because
Yep.
he's traveling with these people and he knows he drew the short straw, so he's thinking, are they going to kill me in my sleep now?
Mhm.
And so that added a whole other element to it. But I was shocked when the author said they really were not starving. I mean, most they were dying of hypothermia is what was happening, but
Yeah.
because they were also very hungry and they had been so hungry for so long that they kind of got it in their head that these people who were dying were starving, and
Yeah.
so that added another kind of weird psychological element to this.
Yeah.
Now, what did you think about the the actual act of cannibalism and how all that went down? What did you think about?
Well, about the guy and the guys and the gals, the disparity between the death rates. I think also one of the things that was surprising, real quick, is that yeah, I think part of it is the guys were doing a lot of the physical stuff, and as soon as you got hurt, it was a really
Yeah,
bad story. And what we kind of saw through the movement is people who were injured or kind of going south, um, as far as their health goes, they kept ending up further and further behind everyone else. Now, like they talk about, they were a mile or two behind, and I don't know how often you just walk in the woods, but being a mile behind a group, I would never find them. I would just die pretty quickly.
yeah,
Um, so it was like if you got hurt, you started ending up moving a little bit slower, and they were at a survival point, so they were like, let's make sure we all get across the finish line together. They were like, you got to watch out for yourself, and they would just leave
yeah.
people behind and eventually die. As far as the cannibals goes, I read Alive, which is actually, it was the same publisher, and they had the same little PS thing in the bottom to, I don't know, the insights, interviews, and more. I read that when my wife was in the hospital giving birth, not giving birth yet, but there is nothing more terrifying than reading about cannibalism, falling asleep in a hospital, and waking up to somebody having birth in the room next door with no drugs. It was horrible. There was no transition for me. It was just like eating people, wake up screaming, and it, it was rough. But like they got pretty detailed there, and I think one of the things that is hard for us to imagine. It's hard for me to imagine. I don't hunt. So I've never butchered anything and really chopped up meat. So I generally eat things medium well done, except for like sushi. And I can't picture it in my mind, but I know people can. But one of the things they talked about, he was pretty graphic about it, was just they basically cut any kind of identifying parts
Yeah,
off early when they're preparing the meat. So they're cutting off limbs, they're cutting off the heads, they're cutting off sexual organs. I think they want to. It's kind of like they're cleansing it. So it's, instead of it looking like a person that they knew, they're trying to make it look as close to meat as possible.
yeah,
So they don't have to think about that. Now they're like in survival situation. I think at some point the body takes over and just says, "I need food,"
yeah,
so they can get around it that way. But there's that. So I think he did a good job of talking about the preparation, which is graphic but interesting. But then also like justifying it to yourself. And one of the things in Alive that they talked about, and Alive is, it was a Uruguayan rugby team that crashed in the Andes. Like horrible situation for them, because it was like some people died in the crash, and then there was an avalanche later, which killed a lot of other people
yikes.
in the plane. They were still in the plane trying to get out, and there was an avalanche, and that suffocated a lot of people in the plane, and then a lot of people died because of exposure. All bad stuff. They started eating their teammates, and their approach was kind of like, this is my body. It's almost like communion, and they were like, I'm giving my body to support you, and that's like the ultimate form of love, where you're like, use my sacrifice to support you, and so you can go on. And there were discussions, at least with the people who weren't dead at the beginning when they had to resort to cannibalism, where they would talk about, I want you to eat me, which is kind of gross. But in that
Yeah,
situation, like, that's nice to say. And there was a little bit of that with the Donner Party. our main character's dad was like, "Eat me,"
Yeah.
and then he died, and she didn't, because and one of the things they did in the book, in real life, was in some ways they tried to randomize what you were getting, so you didn't know you were eating a relative. Because if there's anything worse than just eating another human, it's probably eating a family member.
Yeah.
Unless you're into that kind of thing, which I'm not. So, so I think they went through like the mental gymnastics and some of the physical stuff that had to happen, and some of the stuff that was happening to the people eating, especially later. But also, just going through the physical preparation was pretty interesting too. Because they also
Yeah.
talk about it's not only just preparing the body, but what parts of the body were most sought after, which were most rich in energy, like eating the heart.
Beth
So
Ann said she's glad to hear you're not a
I
cannibal.
never said that.
We're talking about The Indifferent Stars Above, the harrowing saga of the Donner Party.
That
And
was not
yeah, this is yeah, this is an interesting thought, thinking about how we treat human bodies, for me, because I recently went to 2 different cadaver labs. And so yeah, field trip.
BYOB. Bring your own body.
No. But it is so fascinating to learn from people who have donated themselves, to science. And, it.
What did you think tasted the best at the party you went to? Was it the heart?
So,
Because a lot of people said the heart was the best.
you know, it is, you do have to kind of, I don't want to say not see them as human, but in the cadaver labs, they do try to cover the faces and all of that. And of course, you know, I have such respect for the people who have done that, because I think it's super important that we have that opportunity to learn, that our scientists, that our doctors have the opportunity to learn from the real deal.
That's why we had grave robbers before, because
Yeah,
they weren't allowed to do it, so they would have to go and pick up
exactly.
recently buried people.
Yeah, and um, of course, the cadaver labs today are very, sanitized, and everything is so preserved, and it's a little, um,
Why did you
I
go
guess,
to a
easier.
cadaver lab?
For our anatomy classes at school,
Oh, okay.
we took a field trip for anatomy, and
Wow.
we also took a field trip for our intro to health sciences class. And yeah, so I was fascinated by it. So I can see that certain people probably would have had an easier time maybe looking at you know the bodies as they were being, prepared, we'll say. Um, but yeah, some people have cannot handle it at all. And I have been around hunting. I have hunted before. So I
What'd you hunt?
geese, waterfowl. So the only
Okay.
thing I've ever actually killed is
Your
some
partner, your
Canadian
hunting partner.
some Canadian geese. But
Canadian.
yes, I'm not really into deer hunting. But
Wait, you can hunt Canada geese now?
mhm,
Weren't
yeah.
they used to be
Oh gosh, they're
endangered,
everywhere.
or
No,
were they
you
never?
can hunt. No, I don't think so. They're pretty prolific. They're
There are a
everywhere.
lot of them.
Um, but yeah, so I don't know. Maybe that helps, and I'm sure the people, all of the people on the frontier, would have been very familiar with processing meat. Like, I feel like most of
Yeah,
them would have known how to do that, and so I'm
definitely.
sure that definitely made it easier. And I do think you're right that once they kind of remove themselves and see it in a more of a practical, manner, that we just need to get energy. I think the author even said your body takes over, because once it smells cooking meat, there's like chemicals and enzymes and things that are being activated in your stomach. And so it just kind of takes over. And one thing I was shocked to discover is that, well, I don't know it for a fact, but this author says that cooking meat it pretty much smells universally the same.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't matter if it's a leg of lamb or a leg of, Ryan. It doesn't
Well,
matter.
don't microwave fish. That's all I know about preparation of meat. Do not microwave fish in the office. I had a friend. This is kind of gross, but I had a friend in the army, and he talked about. I think it was in Iraq, but they were responding to something, and he could smell like he thought it smelled like Burger King. They got a little hungry, and they realized as they drove on there was actually bodies, and he was so repulsed by that like initial
Yeah.
reaction. But it's you smell meat, and you're just like, that's one of the things I eat. I have these teeth here, so I can eat meat in some way. I'm an omnivore, and yeah, it's a lot of these people couldn't cook too. Like they got to a point where they could try to cook, but then there's also like preparation for it to be raw. And some of these people were eating like their shoes, and you hear about shoelaces and kind of um, preparing rawhide and getting that nice and soft and eating that. It's really it's hard to put yourself in those shoes and say like how would I eat that without throwing up? But the body is an amazing thing that kind of takes over and says, I'm trying to preserve your life. Yeah, I think it happens a lot in history, right? Like the Donner Party was 1940 or 1946, 1846. One of the ones that I've read about was the whale ship Essex. That was 1821, and they had um, they were 1,000, 2,000 miles off the coast and had to eat. There was some cannibalism, at least. And then Alive was in I think the 60s, 50s or 60s, 1950s or 1960s. And it comes up, and he mentions, Daniel James Brown mentions it's taboo. But there's also, I think, an acceptance too when for the people who are in those situations or can find themselves in that situations, it's still taboo, but people who are out at sea, they know that happens sometimes, and there's not as much judging as you would expect. Because before I read this, I thought Donner Party, there was some movie where Donner Party 2 or something like that. I don't know what it was, like a Jim Carrey movie or something. And that was like the full exposure I had was like, these guys are crazy. They try to eat each other. And then you realize like it's a survival situation. I think people are more forgiving when they realize that you are trying to survive. And the interesting thing in the Donner Party was there were a couple killings. It's one thing to eat a dead person. It's another thing to kill somebody to eat them.
Yeah.
And there was the one German who they're pretty sure everyone hated him, and he lived. So that always happens. The losers live. But he was killing people. Yeah, oh yeah, it would be terrifying. He would he was like putting kids up on spikes in the little dwelling that they created, like some of the babies.
Oh,
And
jeez.
that was just kind of, and it looked like he probably lured one of the people down to kill them too. And someone tried to kill him later, but did not succeed. I forgot his name. He was German. Sorry, Germans.
Yeah. Yeah. Now that you say that, I do remember that he put one of the kids on a hook, on like
Yeah,
a meat hook or something that was in the cabin.
it was
Um,
the kid of the person that came to rescue them, and he went
yeah.
in and found his kid, I think, in there, and that's when he was like, "I'm going to kill him," and they're like, "Wait, do it later."
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
And of course, I guess we don't know for sure what happened, but one could
Oh yeah, yeah,
guess.
yeah. Well,
One could guess.
it was like the mother. I think like if you haven't read this book, you think that everyone's hanging out together, which I thought would make sense, but they were kind of spread out when they got
Yeah.
stuck. They were half a mile apart. Some of the camps, which is just crazy.
Well, I think that speaks to the distrust that
Yeah,
that starts to brew among the party, because, like you said before, it's at a certain point everyone has to watch out for their own, and so of course you're going to be most concerned about your family. Now,
Yeah.
there were a few people in the party who did kind of like adopt orphan children, or they took on like, oh, you're a single guy and you don't have a family, like get in with our group. But for the most part, a lot of them were like, sorry, like,
Yeah.
sorry about your luck, but this is survival. We have to look out for our own. And so, yeah, I think the distance that they were putting between each other at that point, I think it just speaks to where they were at mentally, and the mistrust and the suspicion. And at one point we even see I guess I would call her the main character or the main figure in this book, Sarah Graves. I think
What
at
a
one
horrible last name for this kind of thing too.
yeah, I think she finds herself with some money, and she starts to look around and she realizes, okay, I'm a single woman because my husband has died, and I have this money, and these men are, they're going to be out to get me.
I think that was
They're
her mom.
yeah.
She
Okay.
like
Yeah.
buried it.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what it was. So yeah, just to have to even think about those things, and um, in the midst of a true survival situation, you're now having to look at your companions and think, who's out to get me. Um,
Yeah.
very difficult to even imagine that.
Yeah, it's kind of like Lord of the Flies, where it just descends into chaos, and how quickly do people act like animals, versus like a caring, rational human being. But it is all about survival at that point. Um, it's pretty crazy. The German guy was abusive to his wife. Everyone hated him beforehand. We also saw, like, during the trip over, there's a lot of friction. This is like being with your friend for a week. In the first 3 or 4 days, you're like, this is so great, and then you start to get a little tired of your friends, and you're like, all right, I can't do this much longer. And then it's time to kind of separate, but they couldn't really separate, so there were kind of lines drawn in the sand, with the group, and they split up a couple times. Our group, the one that we followed, the Donner Party. I feel bad for the Donners, by the way,
Me
because
too, because
it wasn't really them. Like, it was
it wasn't them.
one of the Donners was voted to be the team captain, kind of, and so the party became known as the Donner Party, but there weren't that many Donners, and it wasn't really his fault. It was really somebody else's that they kind of went with, but they split. Some people went north towards Oregon, and some people went south, and they were trying to go to San Francisco, kind of Southern California area. So, but there was a knife fight in the group that we were following, and a couple killings. They would leave people behind. They would just send them off to die, and it's, if that's your family member, it's really hard to kind of reconcile that later. There's no like, well, I guess sending dad out to his death was normal. They did that, and the guy who they sent out to die ended up surviving and having to come back to save them.
Yeah. So that worked out.
Yeah.
Well, I was really just shocked and kind of disgusted with the gentleman who basically caused all this.
Yeah.
Yeah, to basically save your little business, to save your little outpost, you have made up this quote shortcut, because your business is failing, and you want to bring these people from the trail to your business. It just blew my mind. I was just kind of like, wouldn't it be easier just to pick up and go where the trail leads? Like, you're also, because he also like goes on the trail, right, at certain points, and it's like, okay, you're going on this god awful trail, and people are dying, and they're having to leave necessary supplies behind. Like, this is a disaster, and yet I mean, he continues with this. I mean, I know it's the era of, snake oil and, all of that, but it blew my mind. It
Well,
just
remember he didn't.
absolutely blew my
He went
mind.
ahead, and then he was scared to go back because there's um, so much anger with the party that he was ahead, and he sent somebody else back to help them through the mountains or through the cliffs or whatever they were. He was like a day or two ahead of them, and they got stuck, and they had to send somebody up ahead to this. I think it was a native town or something,
Yeah.
um, and then he wouldn't come back with them um, to help. Yeah, it was for people that don't know. It's basically 1846 was the start of the Mexican American War, which went all the way up to California. It was more focused down in Texas and New Mexico eventually, but um, so I think they were worried that people were going to avoid any kind of Mexican territories there might be fighting in and head north to Oregon. And Hastings' buddy had already gotten a huge plot of land and wanted people to go through that. So and wanted them to settle in that area. I guess probably to increase the value of everything that he had already bought. So Hastings had already created he already had a book that talked about how to travel west, and it was I think a fairly legit book. Like it was accurate sometimes. It was talking about what time to leave, when you shouldn't leave, um, but he came up with this shortcut through this pass. But the problem was he had never been through the shortcut. He just saw it on a map and he declared that to be his pass.
Yeah.
And because he was considered reputable, because he's an author and he's an expert in that kind of westward movement, people start following it. And we're not talking like, one of the things you think about when you're watching movies is, well, there's six wagons, and they have to circle to. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of wagons and
Yeah.
thousands of different kinds of animals. It's a huge continuous. You can even go out there now. They show pictures of the ruts from the
Yeah.
wagon are
That
still in the plains.
blows my mind is that those ruts are
Yeah.
still there.
Yep.
And they're so deep. Like it is just mind blowing.
Yeah. It's crazy.
It's crazy to me.
Yep.
It makes me want to go out there and see them.
I know. I want to go to everything
I'm
where they
scared to
camp
now.
is named Donner, and there's a lot of stuff there. One of the things that one of the main campsites, I guess he said at the end, or it may have been in the extra material, but they built some kind of like toll booth or something there. So there is still one of the areas that some of them camped out in. And then some of the other stuff, a lot of the cannibalism was actually from a group that was trying to find the help. So they left people behind that were either going to be too slow or they had babies or little kids, and they stayed at the camp, and then they were going to try to find help. And they knew where they were going because there was this trading post or whatever, but there was this moment where they could turn right or left, and they would probably had low visibility or something. There was some excuse for why they may have gone the wrong way. Also, the guy who really knew, who had already made the trip, just died. Like that's how much bad luck they had. Not only did they hit it at the worst time, like the day or two after another group had already gone through this pass, but the guy who had made the trip to get some, he made the trip over the pass to get some guides, and he came back with some supplies. He got hurt or something. I forgot how he died, but he died.
Yeah.
Like exposure, he died, and then he couldn't get back. And so nobody who was in the camp had made that trip. They couldn't see over the ridge, so they made the wrong turn. Yeah, okay. Was it because of how high it was, or was it the weather? Like it was too much snow, Mark? Or
Thank
somebody?
goodness for Mark, because I don't remember.
Yeah. Mark's like, I'm not going to answer that. You have to read
Mark
it again.
is like, you guys need to do better.
He doesn't even know.
Better.
He's not finished yet. Mark, they some of them live. Just so you know, some of them died. Some of them
Spoiler.
Spoiler.
Yeah, I'm glad I read this book. I have a new respect for. I mean, I always respected the people who chose to go out west, but I think I have a new respect for it now because and the author does, I guess, take some liberties with trying to put you in that place and imagine, these people, and their hopes and dreams, and, to really make them real people and
Yeah.
not just,
Meat.
yeah.
One of the weird things, I guess, I think the reason I didn't give it a 5 was it felt like it just dropped off at the end. It was like
Yeah.
they made it, and then it's like, okay, well then what? And it was like nobody cared for a few years, and then this guy started digging around that worked for a newspaper, and that's why people got interested, because we kind of said that like this stuff happened, not necessarily this, but people died all the time.
Right.
I had just read a book before this one that was about part of the West. It was about the Rio Grande, and just some of the Plains Indians. There were kind of local tribes, especially along the river, that were, I won't say domesticated, but they didn't rove. They had houses they built. They stayed.
A little more settled.
Yeah, they
in
were
one area.
settled, and the Plains Indians were following herds of typically buffalo. But also because of that, some of those tribes are remembered as being more violent, like the Apaches and Comanches. And when I was reading this book about the history of the river from thousands of years ago up until 54, 64 or something, 1964, it talks about some of those raids, and there were thousands of Apaches. Like you watch movies like Hostiles, or even like Dance with the Wolves, and you see like, okay, that's a good number, but thousands and thousands of horse riding Comanches riding people down, and not just settlers, but also a lot of the Pueblo Indians that were along the river. Um, it's There's definitely a lot of people that died. So
Yeah.
this could have been just another number of people who died in the mountains, and it happens all the time. I came across the bodies that are near the summit for Everest tweet, and it just has bodies they don't take down. So there's just these frozen bodies that are along the path of people going up Everest, and it's just kind of accepted. And some of them they haven't identified. But it was because this reporter, and this was sensationalized when it first came to light, when people realized what had happened. It was like they were hunting them down, and they were reading books or like discussing how to best cook them so they tasted good, and they were trying to eat the babies first and whatever. It was like National Enquirer of the 1800s. But then this newspaper reporter dug in deeper and was able to interview, and there's a book that you can still buy. I think it's from 1909 or something, but it's the interviews with some of them, and some of them misremember things or probably save themselves a little bit of the embarrassment. But
Yeah.
it's because of that work that people still know it. Because our author, the one that we read, Daniel James Brown, it really felt like it just kind of ended. It was like they got there, and then he gave us some general history about some areas like Napa Valley, and then he never found her body. The main person that we were looking at, Sarah Graves, and then it
Yeah.
was kind of over.
Yeah. I do agree. It was kind of an unremarkable ending.
And I think that's just because the reality was they just kind of went their separate ways and tried to live
Yeah.
their lives.
No, I
What
think
it was like then.
it's really, um, I just think it speaks to the fact that these people were ordinary people of the day. And unfortunately, something super horrific happened to them, and they survived, and they just went on with their lives. And I think most of them tried to, forget about it,
Yep.
and didn't really want the stigma um, attached to them. And I thought it was interesting. One of the survivors, I can't remember which one, but he ended up going back through that area, and the people that he was with basically said like he just kind of disappeared for a while.
Yeah.
And just kind of like went off to himself. And some of them speculated, well, maybe he was looking for some, silver or something they buried, or
Right.
maybe. No, I tend to think he was probably just remembering,
Yeah.
and kind of working through that. Mark said he was a bit surprised at how many of the survivors were the kids, which,
Because
yeah,
Mark's a
that's
teacher. He would have taken the kids out first. He's tired of those kids. They're a little more tender. They won't fight back as much.
Oh,
Is
well,
that why,
I
Mark?
think that speaks to the fact that, the kids are who they're doing this for anyway, right? I mean, they're going out west for the future. And
Yeah.
who's the future? The future is the kids, and so I
Well,
think
and to get to the
everybody.
kid, we kind of talked about how people didn't want to eat their relatives, but to get to the
Yeah,
kid, you would have to kind of fight whoever's taking care of them. Like the
yeah,
mama bears are not going to let somebody pick off their kids first. They'll die for their kid,
right.
and the dads will too. So it's kind of like
Well,
you had to wait for a whole family to die before that was an option, which I think is what kind of happened with the ones that were eaten, where
yeah,
it was they didn't have anybody else left to care for them, or the people that were left were so sick that they really couldn't. They had no energy. They couldn't get up. They couldn't do anything. So they were kind of vulnerable at that point.
well,
But
and
otherwise, yeah, I wouldn't
some
let somebody eat my kid.
something too to think
Mark.
about is that they wouldn't provide that much sustenance.
Yeah.
Even the adults that they were eating, I was interested to
Oh
note.
yeah.
I think he said that the average a male, adult male would um, render like 65 pounds of usable meat. Um, but that the people in the Donner Party that were cannibalized, it was far, 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 far less than that, just because of everything they'd been through along the trail, and
Yeah.
their bodies were pretty much wasted, and so there
That's why I
wasn't a
tried to
whole lot
gain
of
weight
usable
during
meat.
COVID. So if I get in this situation, I'll help out my fellow travelers. Make
Anything
it
to help.
more energy for them. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I thought that was interesting that they were having to, you know, kind of um,
They got to a point
survive
where
on some gristle and
they were
whatever
using
was
like
left.
more energy to go look for something to kill than they would get from what they ended up killing. If they were because there were times
Yeah,
where they'd go hunt, but they had to keep going further and further away to find wood to cook and then to find animals.
yeah,
And they were so weak that it was hard for them to shoot straight anyway. And they were also using pretty old
yeah,
firearms.
yeah. They were
Like these
still
people are
using like
using
the
firearms that
flintlock.
they had. What's
Yeah,
that?
they were still using like the flintlock
Yeah,
guns out there. Yeah, that was kind of surprising, but
yeah.
um,
What's
yes,
weird when you think about the westward movement too is a lot of the people that were involved with this, the Donner Party, they had already moved west. Um, I kind of mentioned like if you read something about Native Americans, and then watch like Last Mohicans, like Last Mohicans. That's pretty much every other Native American movie, but they're hundreds of years apart. So Last Mohicans was really taking place in New York and Pennsylvania and along the Smokies. And well, it was filmed in the Smokies. It's like these people had moved from the East Coast and they settled in Western New York, upstate New York, and then they moved a little bit further and a little bit further. So a lot of these families they've been making that Western movement as cheaper land became more available further west, and it was safe because there was still always that threat. Some of the Graves family, they were involved in this Black Hawk war in Illinois. Is it Illinois? I think it's near Chicago. I think it was near Illinois. Chicago Blackhawks.
yeah.
Uh, so that was part of the reason they were really concerned about Native Americans on the way over. But also, it was not like we're used to. It's not they settled an area and now that area was America and advanced, and then they would move over. It was like little iterative process. So
The
even
work
though,
was just starting.
yeah,
When
yeah,
they go there, the work is really just starting.
and they were
Yeah,
still pretty isolated, even in Illinois
yeah.
and Missouri.
They're just going from one frontier to another.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So they've already endured some of this. They've already kind of tested themselves. I think that also contributes to not the mistakes because I can't fault them, but it contributes to the fact that they've already done this. So I think they can trust themselves enough to make decisions. It's like survivor bias. Like everyone who made the right decisions and survived, you're like they know what they're doing, but it may just be because they survived. There are plenty of people who knew what they were doing, but they made that one turn the wrong way, and and they don't live to talk about it or go back and tell other people how to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about grit and fortitude and, what humans can do, but at the end of the day, we are super fragile. And it just gives you a great respect for nature and um,
Medicine.
medicine. And yeah, I think it's also just a look at a cool kind of look at America and just how vast we are. I
Yeah.
think it's easy to forget. It's easy to, even nowadays, you just kind of get caught up in, where you live and your day to day. And just to think that all of this is right here in our country, it's just crazy what people did to settle it. And,
Yeah.
um, it's just,
It's
it's
really
pretty
hard to
remarkable.
see it through our modern eyes. I think one of the things I think still is an issue. People get really used to just 911. Like I have cell phone service. I have an issue. I'm gonna call AAA. I'm gonna call
Yeah.
911. What you see like at sea is people get in trouble and they're used to that response and that connection, and they find out that they're 400 miles out and something can come there, but it's going to be doing 20 knots in good weather, so they're going to have to be out there for 20 hours. It's like
Yeah.
that. People aren't used to that. Did I do that math right? That's the right math. 20 hours, and they have to survive for 20 hours. These are people who there's no calling anybody, and they've got to survive the whole way, or back, or they're dead. There's no do-overs. There's no like, let's just hop on the bus and head back and try again. That's all you
Yeah.
got left. So, and it's like I don't, I would not want to do this with my family at all.
No.
But also to have to think about family in that way, that we do have to rely on us because no one else is going to, and that's maybe why we saw the camps so spread out too. Is it's we're going to make this through. We're going to make it through this because we know we can trust our people, and they've done it before. So if we can all get across together, cool. But if we can't, we at least need to be with the people we know can handle it, even if they couldn't in the end.
Yeah, Beth Ann, books like this make me think of the modern day prepper crowd that are so convinced they'll be able to survive just fine without civilization. I don't think they realize how many people died, even people with incredible wilderness survival experience.
People that think that
Yeah,
they can beat up bears. People like I could fight a grizzly. Just when you're done watching this, YouTube grizzly bear fight. There's no way that would ever. There's no way you're gonna beat up a
that's
bear.
not going to end well. Yeah,
No.
I can tell you that. Um,
But also, like, there's other things that are going on, right? We talked about the diseases and virus, and they didn't know about that stuff. There were a lot of deaths that just had to do with having a tooth decay and
yeah,
having infection and dying
yeah,
of my tooth.
yeah,
Um, just a lot of stuff that now we take for granted as being something very easy to fix, and it would linger, and then it would become a bigger problem, and it would kill a lot of people. The other thing is like when we talked about when we were reading it, so many people died, and you can't put that into today's system and not be completely blown away. They were talking about like they're burying 10 people a day or something. Basically, at one point they're just kind of dropping it on the side of the road because they didn't have enough time. They were running out
yeah,
of supplies, so they're just kind of leaving them there. Um, but think about any organization you're in. If you're losing 10 people a day,
yeah,
or you've lost 400 or 600 over the month, that would be a lot. There would be a lot of morale issues with that, and you would know when it would stop. And I mean, like we look at one person dies over COVID, and offices mourn, and they're like, I can't believe I'm never going to see this person again. They were losing 600 people right next to them, having to bury, and then
it's
move it on.
really remarkable that they still had the capacity, kind of like you say, like the capacity to love and care for their family members and the people around them, because I think at a certain point when you experience loss on such a grand scale, you become desensitized,
Yeah.
and it's almost like you know you don't want to care about anybody because they're gonna die. And I guess maybe part of that too, though, is they had more experience with death overall in
Oh
that
yeah.
era than we did,
Right.
and than we do.
And some
Um,
cultures wouldn't even name their kids for the first
yeah,
few
because
days
you
because
don't know if they're going to survive, and
right.
like you said before, they're used to the high mortality rate with their kids, and you know they have a more close relationship with death, if that makes
Sure.
any sense
Yeah.
at all. And so, yeah, I guess maybe that worked to their advantage, because if they hadn't, if we transported ourselves to this, and like you said, we're losing 10, acquaintances, or 10 colleagues, or 10, people we know every day, that
Shock.
it wouldn't take long for us to
Yeah.
lose it,
Right. Exactly.
so
I can still think of like somebody died in a tree near my house in Alexandria, Virginia. Uh, so I think they had a heart attack or something. They were cutting limbs. They were really high up. It was some kind of tree cutting service. And I still think about seeing the body wedged in there and just being like, ooh. My dad's a doctor, and death doesn't affect him the same way because he sees people die. He tries to keep them
tries
from
to
dying,
not.
but he'll see people die over the years where like even going into like a wake or whatever, it's still I'm not used to it. And I could, yeah, if I was seeing that around me, I'm like, I can't believe this is happening. But it's just kind of like, well, we've got to move on. Here's how you prepare them. We want to dig them this deep so coyotes can't get to them, and we got to keep
Yeah,
going. Yeah, that's a good point.
yeah.
It really is hard to see it through our lens and be anything but I'm gonna say disgusted. I wasn't disgusted by what they did, but it's hard to see it and not just panic. Um, but then you kind of put it in the context of this is stuff that they were pretty hardy people, and they lived in a place, not just coyotes. Yes. Um, what else, Mark? What else would be eating people? Shallow graves in Europe. Jackals. I don't even know what they have there.
All right, so
We have coyotes.
we've made it past the hour, Ryan. So, is there anything else that you'd like to say? Any last thoughts about the book?
Oh, they're fellow travelers. Yes.
I knew where he was going with that.
Well, they didn't
Um,
bury. That's just too much action. You just gotta eat them before you bury them. You don't want them dirty. No, I don't actually know how to. I should have prepared something to close this out with you. I don't even. I should point out that I am taking leave. I'm on vacation to do this. This is not during my work hour. So, if anybody knows where I work, I'm on leave. No, I like that. It's one of those things that I think a lot of people know of the Donner Party, but almost in passing, like you don't really know what happened, who was involved, the scale and time period, and I really had no idea where they were when it happened until I read it, and then I was like, I pictured them up in like Dakota or something. I don't even know what I was thinking, but yeah, I think it's really neat to read these books that are about something in time, like a Lorena Bobbitt, and to know that something happened, but not really have the full story, and then read about it. I enjoyed this, and I do think he does write in a way that he mixes kind of the spiritual stuff and the science and the historical stuff all together, so you kind of get a feel for everything,
yeah,
and get a maybe not 360-degree look, but a good look at everything. And he explains things that are not common to us and how they work, and that was really helpful. The breakdown of what was going on physically and stuff. So I like that. And he has a book. He has a movie coming out soon.
Oh, really?
I don't know if do you have the paperback?
I
The
do.
Boy in the Boat.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Have I read The Wager, Ryan? Well, Mark, it sounds like you don't watch my videos because I watched The Wager right after I got back from London, from your country. Yeah, I did. The Wager is awesome. It's actually like probably my second most successful video in the second half of my time on BookTube. I think because they just had the Killers of the Flower Moon, and he's the same author, and his The Wager just came out. So yeah, I like The Wager.
I haven't read that.
It's good.
All right. Well, I think I'm gonna go hit the gym, and
Cool.
I really enjoyed reading this book with you, Ryan. I really enjoyed talking about it. You definitely kept it lively, and I always enjoy your jokes and your little puns. And
I didn't bring any food. That was more preparation.
fail on that, Ryan. But we'll forgive you. You know, I could snack and read this book. It really didn't bother me. I know some people were probably a little, you know, weird feeling reading the book, but and it was disturbing, but
yeah, roast beef. It's not like a roast beef time.
Yeah, probably not. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I thought the author did a great job. Even if you're not super familiar with the Donner Party, I think especially if you're not super familiar with the Donner Party, I think this is a great book to read. And you know, even if you're not super interested in history, I think, you know, like you said, kind of the different aspects that he includes in the book make it very readable. So yeah, I really enjoyed having you on,
Thanks for having
and
me.
feel free, Ryan, to stay in the Black Hearts Book Club group chat. And even if you don't read with us, just you know, pop in with a joke every once in a while.
Well, we're doing another one in that's disgusting, Mark. These are our fellow Americans. How dare you? What was I gonna say? Oh, they just had recent cannibalism in Europe, right? In the last 10 years. I remember that being it was like a German. Poor Germans. It's like the second time I mentioned German. Somebody like
Es tut mir leid, mein deutsche Freunde.
Oh no, yeah. Nice. But what was I gonna say? Oh, we're gonna do another one.
Yeah.
In June, I think.
Yeah, I'm trying. Yeah, you're my Dime Store Desperados. Is that what we're doing? Yeah, it's like it's kind of out west again. So there we go. Yeah. Maybe that's our thing. Maybe we'll do that every year. No cannibalism in this one though, so I think we're safe on that front. So
there's always a chance.
There's a chance. I haven't read it yet, so can't guarantee.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, and thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah.